Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of the Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna De Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube, and the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft, and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hello! Welcome, everyone. It is so good to have everyone here. Welcome to my home. Welcome to the office. Welcome to Table Talk tonight. And this is going to be an absolute landmark episode of Table Talk, because we are going to be having a discussion between Doug Burton, who's one of everyone's favorite guests here on the channel, the author of the Heroine's Labyrinth, which is going to be coming out next month, and Christopher Vogler, who is the author of The Writer's Journey, which is the book that articulates the hero's journey and has become basically the standard articulation for the hero's journey for the past 25 years and is basically on every writer's bookshelf, whether you're writing a screenplay or you're writing a novel. So we're bringing both of these people together tonight for a conversation. Everyone, please welcome Doug and Chris Vogler.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Thank you so much, everybody.
Glad to be
so much
here.
to everybody in the chat for being here, and then also to both of you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Doug, you want to start with you? You want to just give a brief intro to who you are? I'm going to bring up and then we'll go to Chris after that. But if people
my name is
what we're talking about tonight.
Right. So my name is Douglas A. Burton, and my debut novel was a historical fiction novel about the Byzantine Empress Theodora. And while writing it, I bet the farm on the hero's journey, which I love and support, but it did not help me in the end to writing this book. I ran into structural problems and was devastated that the hero's journey was not solving it. And while writing this, it led me to study heroine-centric stories, like in a serious way. It led on a 4-year adventure, culminating in the book that's coming out soon. The pre-orders will be available March 24th. I'm sorry, February 24th, and then the book will come out March 26th. So that's me.
So we've been preparing a lot over the past few weeks, talking about all the stuff that is relevant to the Heroine's Labyrinth. And now, Christopher Vogler, I've got your book right here, of course.
Yep.
But would you want to tell everyone in 2 minutes what this is, in case they are not familiar with it? I think lots of people here are.
Well, I'll just say that I am a farm boy from Missouri who was on a quest to find out what was going on with these wonderful stories that I saw as a kid on TV and the old movies from the 40s and 50s and the movies of my day in the 60s and 70s. And that quest led me to film school at USC, and there I encountered the work of Joseph Campbell. And I didn't know anything about Campbell, never heard of the man, but some things came together at the right timing for me. I've been studying Greek gods and all my life, and there's one dedicated just to good timing, and he was looking out for me. The god Kairos is the god of good timing. And the timing was that a professor pointed me to the hero's journey, to Campbell's book, The Hero with the Thousand Faces. Within 1 week of that, the first Star Wars movie came out, validating everything that I had just discovered, that here was the secret code I was looking for. So I went to work with a task to translate Campbell's sometimes esoteric description of the hero's journey into useful, practical language that filmmakers especially could use. And that turned into my book, The Writer's Journey. And meanwhile, I was working for the studios as a story analyst, as a consultant, as an advisor to them on what movies to make and how to make them ready for the screen. So this was my life preserver and my lighthouse and way of navigating through reading 10 or 20,000 screenplays. So that's my identity. And now I travel around enlightening people, if I can, on this idea of the writer's journey, the hero's journey, and look forward to seeing how it continues. And that's why I'm so happy to be here talking with you and Douglas, because it's not a dead thing, and it lives on and it evolves. It must. And you've just, Douglas, you just opened up a huge, very, very needed area and thoroughly explored it. And I really appreciate that, because that's part of my self definition is that I'm a thorough graduate student, and I really beat up the idea and tried to go as deep as I could, and you have done the same, and I really salute that and want to support you and see what else you come up with.
Well, thank you very much. There's no higher compliment.
All right, so my job here was to kind of host a discussion between these two gentlemen here. We've got a little bit less than an hour now with Chris Vogler, so we're going to dive right in. We're going to try to cover as much material as we can, and I kind of organized notes based on sort of chronologically through a story. So let's start kind of at the beginning of a story, and let's talk about what might be considered Act 1. Whether we're talking about the Heroine's Labyrinth or the hero's journey here. So how do we set up an Act 1 structure? And specifically later, we're going to talk about the refusal of the call and how we embody that. But how do we say, when we talk about what might be considered a general Act 1 structure, because obviously the hero's got to be called to do something in some way. What are the differences between that in a Heroine's Labyrinth kind of story and a hero's journey kind of story?
Well, Douglas, I'll defer to you on that one. You've just been, swimming in this. So, what are your findings?
Well, one of the few things that crossed over from the hero's journey into the heroine's labyrinth is the call to adventure. And part of the reason for that, I believe, is the call to adventure is, or an inciting moment. These are things I think that are inherent to a story, regardless of which structure you use. So you're going to get something that pulls your character into the story, into the action and the drama that drives the story from the beginning to its conclusion. So for me, it was setting up the labyrinth. So heroes and heroines both tend to start in a home environment. And one of the early things that are deviations I noticed was a lot of heroes, there was a claim on their labor. The home society has a claim on the hero's labor. And this didn't seem to be as prevalent in heroine-centric stories. They seem to be, especially in earlier literature and mythology, kind of steered toward the three archetypes of the innocent virgin, the fertile bride, and the chaste mother. That seemed to be what societies or native cultures wanted from them. And in the hero's journey, there was a claim on the hero's labor, and then the hero gets swept away from the native culture in a lot of these stories. So establishing the labyrinth for me was very important, because I believe the labyrinth is a socio-cultural structure that's manifested in this imagery and in this feeling.
Okay, I'd go in, I suppose it's appropriate, more generally. And I'm delighted to hear the specifics and the observations that you've made. I see the openings of films as a kind of a building of a relationship with the audience, where you are trying to motivate them to follow your story. And you want to give them a certain kind of orientation. And I think that may be what you're talking about with establishing the labyrinth and the heroine's place in that. And, what are the forces and the tensions and desires that will get the audience involved. I think there are operations. There are sort of universal operations in telling a story, whether you're dancing it around a fire with the skin of an antelope in the shamanic way, or whether you're unspooling Oppenheimer. You need to give me a sense of there's a place, there's a battleground, perhaps. There's a need, as you say, the call to adventure. There is sometimes a polarization within that world that's presented, and maybe, and in most stories, I think there are two worlds. And so we see one world, the native world of the hero, and it's usually polarized, and the hero has some relationship to that. They might be in the foreground, an important person there, or they might be way in the background, sort of invisible. They may be in conflict with their native world, but we have the opportunity here to set those things up and get the audience hooked with usually some questions along the lines of who are they? What do they want? What are their, by who are they, I mean, what are their qualities? What is their character? How do they behave under pressure? And then what is driving them? What's the tick-tock within them? What's missing? That's a big one that I find in looking at a lot of myths and legends and fairy tales. Often there is an absence. Some piece is missing from the hero. They need something. Someone's taken away from their family unit. So these are all, I think, necessary operations to make a connection with the audience, so they feel in some way, this is the magic trick, some way, this is really about me. People are so profoundly self-centered that they need to be seduced into following the story by giving them signals that this is about someone who's very different from you, but in some certain ways similar. They need things, they want things, they're frustrated, they're conflicted, they're trapped. And so I am too. And I want to see how they handle it because I'm looking for clues about my own difficult situation. And I think that this is absolutely how people consume stories, with eyes wide open, going, well, where am I in this? And if I'm not in it, then I just check out. But if there's something about me that I can use in my mysterious life, then I'm in and I'm paying attention.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Those are the things that resonate with audiences. And if you can create a three-dimensional character, the audience will start to see themselves in that character. And before you know it, they're along for the ride. And I think that that's what makes you turn pages incessantly or watch a movie 3 or 4 times, because you're going through that experience that resonated with you from beginning to end. And that's huge.
Yeah, I just make one room for one exception here, which I think we're seeing more of in the world of streaming, where stories have gotten extreme and they're very competitive, so they have to be a little bit startling. And so there is a kind of watching in which you can't believe their behavior, and it's so outrageous that you say, this isn't anything like me. So how can this person even continue? Aren't they going to be destroyed by the natural forces of society? How are they getting away with this? But again, you watch with attention, and always with this in the back of your mind, this might be something here I could use. And so if their behavior is outrageous, maybe I need to be a little outrageous and can learn from that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too about streaming, because it's kind of reinventing storytelling a little bit into this really long form, 10 hours, 20 hours of watching over, 5 seasons and everything. So you have the mini series now that's becoming present. So, I think storytellers are going to be going back to basics somehow with the hero's journey, and hopefully the heroine's labyrinth, and finding archetypal designs that they can repeat in different forms. Because that's the beauty of an archetypal design, is it's the same underneath, but the way that it's expressed can be completely different from one minute to the next. So they are extremely flexible archetypes.
That's right. It's beautiful. Yes.
In the idea of things that we relate to in story, this leads excellently into another topic. And this is one of the features of the hero's journey that Chris Vogler discusses, and that's the refusal of the call. So let's talk about that for a moment, because this is actually something that I talked also with Cameron about. I wrote a story and he was like, wait a minute, there's a problem here. The hero never rejects the call, the refusal of the call. That's not present in the story. So we got a problem here. But then actually, as I was reading through here, you came up with an idea which I thought was very fascinating. That how do you deal with willing heroes? Because you had the idea that you can embody the refusal of the call in another character. So you can have willing heroes, but you still need to ingest the refusal of the call, this archetype. And then I want to talk about how the Heroine's Labyrinth deals with that. But Chris, do you want to talk about how you deal with willing heroes and the refusal of the call?
Yeah, that is a category that I sort of uncovered when I was reviewing as many examples as I could to build my theory. There was this subset of characters who seemed to be not reluctant, not fearful at all. And yet somebody else in the design gave the speeches and did the actions that normally would be done by the unwilling, fearful hero. And I came to the conclusion, someone standing next to the hero, or an authority figure, or a friend, or an enemy, would say something along the lines of, it's fine you want to go do that, but don't you know that everyone who tried it has been killed? No one's ever succeeded. You want to go to film school? You want to write a screenplay? You know how few of those get passed through? You know how few people actually get to write a screenplay and get produced? So these forces arise. And I think they're there for a functional reason, which is to announce to that audience, because it's always about relating to the audience and drawing them in. We can't let go of that. The idea that this is all about interacting and creating a bridge between the story and the characters and the audience. And so the audience needs to feel, in order to keep watching, they need to feel, man, this is dangerous. This could kill you. And whether that's expressed by the hero going, oh, I don't want to do that. That's really scary. Or I tried it before and it didn't work. Somebody else says, you better watch out. That could really bring you down. And I don't think that's a good idea. So the audience goes, oh, well, this could be scary. And then they're watching with even more attention to see, how they're going to deal with it. So I'm curious, what is the twist in this labyrinth?
Right, because Doug, you realized that you noticed, one of the things you noticed was there was infrequently a refusal of the call in heroine-centric stories.
Right. So one of the cool things about the heroine's labyrinth is it's not in contradiction to the hero's journey. It does not invalidate anything. It doesn't take anything away from it. In fact, everything Christopher Vogler just said is very much intact and will always be intact for hero's journey interpretations, or for either hero's journey moments or not. So if it is a hero's journey moment, you will still get this refusal of the call. And I agree with everything he just said. The refusal of the call is a clue. It clues in the audience that this is dangerous. So and that's why the hero balks. He's thinking twice about, he might have been pining for adventure. She may have said, I want this other thing. And then here it is. And it's like, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm second guessing it. I already knew my old life. I understand how I fit into it. It's best to stay here and just wish away instead of actually going on this adventure. That's a huge thing. And we identify with heroes that refuse the call. We're like, yeah, okay. He's not sure now. When I was studying heroine-centric stories, I actually started writing an article called The Incomplete Heroine, because I was getting frustrated that so many heroines skipped this step. So I thought it was actually a failure in writing that they were skipping the refusal of the call. And my whole point was exactly what Mr. Vogler said. Don't the writers know how important this step is? Don't they know that this step is important because it signals that we're going into a dangerous world where there are higher stakes, both in the maturation process, in the boon, there's a lot at stake here. Well, I started second guessing myself because I realized that home began to symbolize something a little different to the heroine. So they are often held aside. They're barred from participation on some level in society. They're only allowed to go into certain events, and there's a very narrow range of behaviors that are acceptable. So the heroine often feels a little closed off. She's much more wanting to get out there without the restraints and experience society without this kind of thumb on the scale. So I asked myself, I went back to the original idea of the hero's journey. I think the primal reason for the hero's journey is a soldier or a warrior's journey. I think that's the primal core of, of where this story began. So the hero is being asked to leave the native culture and face possible annihilation, far from home often. You better think twice about that. That is scary. So I asked myself, is that what the heroine's call to adventure is? Is that the same thing? And I decided it was not. That the hero is facing annihilation. And when I was reading like Anna Karenina or Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre, let's say, the heroines weren't necessarily facing destruction far from home. So I realized that their reason to refuse the call might be missing in some cases. They're more willing to go the second they get a chance to get out there and break free of those restraints. Many heroines jump at that chance. And it wasn't a weakness in the writing. It was a different motivation. And this, I think, is important. However, I noticed also when death was on the table for heroines, they also vacillated. Even in the movie Barbie, which just came out, she has a very strong refusal of the call. And what does she say when they're doing that like dance number? She's like, who thinks of death? Death is on her mind. So she is worried about death when she uses that call. So my interpretation was that the more the hero or the heroine's destruction is on the table, the more likely they are to refuse the call. Secondly, the more confining the home environment is, the more likely they are to skip the refusal of the call. But to Mr. Vogler's point, there are still characters in heroine-centric stories who take on that role for the heroine. Hey, don't go out there. It's crazy. You know, it's dangerous. But heroines are always like, nope, I'm going to go past the breakers. I'm out of here. Wonder Woman storms off the screen when she gets the chance in the first Wonder Woman. So anyway, a little different.
Yeah, I just would add there's another little subset here, which is those heroes who are completely dedicated to it and just jump right in, both feet, don't think twice about it. And one name for them is fools. And they often are brought up short, especially when they enter the new world, the special world. They might have a crash landing, and they might be brought up very sharply by reality. So there is that possibility too. But I just want to just express my delight that you're sort of oriented, I see, towards blending this with the conventional hero's journey and acknowledging without destroying it that it needs work, it needs development, it needs further exploration, because there is a school of criticism attack about this that only goes at it from the point of view of this is wrong, this is toxic, this is dangerous, and it's all wrong. And so I'm happy, because this is how I feel, that there's room for everything, and none of these systems deny each other. They're all compatible. They're simply looking at the same thing, which is human behavior under stress from different points of view. And so there isn't any real right or wrong about these things, I think. And I appreciate that you seem to have you as well.
I agree with you. In fact, it's my hope that by having a heroine's labyrinth defined, articulated, and at the ready, people will feel less the need to attack the hero's journey. Because I think because it's the only model, and I think one of the largest criticisms I've encountered time and time again is that there is a male centrism to the hero's journey, that it's got too much of it's got the whiff of masculinity too much. But if I'm right, and the primal core of the hero's journey stems from the warrior's journey, Bronze Age, like going back, warrior is going to save culture by setting out. Well, the term I came up with was the warrior role. Anyone can fulfill the warrior role. Because many of the people who filled the warrior role were men, I think that's where the male centrism comes in. But the warrior role is not inherently masculine. It's just been fulfilled by a lot of men. So I think that's why it gets criticized, in my opinion, unfairly. So again, I hope that by having a realistic alternative model, the hero's journey can stand on its own, because it will. It's not going anywhere, even if people don't like it. It's there forever.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, it's like the color wheel, or the notes of the scale. There's an essential need for these things. I would push back in time just a little bit on the warrior thing, because I would sort of park it more with the hunter, the hunter who has to go out and confront nature and all the difficulties of the trail and the animals that have to be dealt with. And that helps me a little bit to get it off the militaristic assumptions that people make if we go back there. And I think research now, anthropological research and archaeology, is showing us there were plenty of female warriors, first of all.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're digging up tombs all the time and going back and looking at the bones on things where they had decided, oh, that's a man. Obviously, he's got all the weapons. It must be a man. And then they look at the bones and they go, no, sorry, that was a well-equipped militaristic woman. Same with the hunting. That anthropology is now moving to this thought that the women just didn't stay home and take care of the kids. They went out actively and participated and did their own hunting. So I think that helps to maybe shift it a little bit off the.
That's a great point.
Militaristic charge.
Well, and it also features because one of the things about the warrior role that I noted was the tendency for a single combat in the climax. The hunter role fulfills that as well. So that's great. I actually love that.
It's you and the game, and there's all this mythology about that you have to enter into the mind of the prey, and you have to evoke them. You have to ask their permission and their forgiveness. And so, the wise cultures of the past knew all this, and it's embedded in our stories too.
I think that's beautiful.
Let's talk about then what happens next after the call to adventure, and that's the entrance into the other world. Because I was wrestling with this back and forth, trying to understand what this meant in the context of both the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth. That when you leave your everyday life after Act 1, and then you go into the other world or the underworld, or however you want to phrase it, but you're entering a different world after that, where a lot of the Act 2 story is going to be taking place. Doug is big on with the heroine's labyrinth between making a distinction between like a heroine who is going to deal with some other part of her own culture, whereas a hero often goes outside of that. And I'm wondering, how do we distinguish what it means for something to be your culture? And by that, for instance, I mean, I could set up a Act 1 story where somebody is here in, a rural, farmland kind of environment, and then they go to the big city. Or likewise, they start off in the big city, and then in their Act 2, they're going to the rural area. But it might still be within the United States, for instance. That could still be your cultures. But that's rural. So in one way, you go, that's rural, that's urban. Those are different things. You're going into the other world. On the other hand, you're like, but that's still your culture. It's still the United States. Katniss going from, her area to the capital. So in one way, that's crossing the boundary into, the capital city and everything like that. But on the other hand, it's still her culture. So how do I distinguish between those two, or how do I know what they are? How do I categorize that in the story? Chris, do you want to start off with that? Like, what does it mean to go into the other world?
Well, I had to confront this because I discovered that, there is a small category, but a category of stories where there isn't this kind of movement. There isn't this kind of travel to another place. There isn't a distinct geographical, physical difference in two different worlds. You might stay the whole thing in a one-act play. You never leave the room. And so I had to, fit this in and understand, where is the labyrinth there? Where is the special world? And I think you can find it fairly easily, which is something happens often at the call to adventure that changes the conditions in that room or inside someone's head. And so the person that we're following, the culture or the society or the family that we're following has to deal with something that's gone along in a certain way, and maybe it doesn't work quite right and it's uncomfortable, but then something happens, and the body of the story that would normally be geographically different is simply a new set of conditions that sometimes a new person enters, or someone has just decided something that I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to say my truth. That's a common thing in plays, and I'm going to take the consequences, and I don't care. And that will shake up the world and change it, even though you don't physically leave the original environment. So that's how I came to deal with this in conventional stories.
Well, and so I'm very similar, in fact. I don't think the special world is nullified by any stretch. In fact, I'm coming to terms with it. So I've studied the hero's journey for so long, and like you, like most people, admire its timeless qualities. And there are stories that it's harder to fit the hero's journey onto. And so you stretch a little bit, or try to, like you said, you find it something distinctive to make it work, or for it to make sense, I guess, from a storytelling standpoint as a special world. So I have all these notes for all these stories that I might view as a Heroine's Labyrinth story today. However, a hero's journey interpretation can still be put on them. You could still interpret a special world here. For me, it helps. It simply helps to say that here's the special world, to just ask the question, is it a labyrinth? Are you going deeper into your native culture, or are you leaving the native culture? It helps to ask the question because archetypally, I think the journey is different. I think when you are interacting with familiar people who speak the same language as you, who know all the social rules as you, who may even be better at social rules. They can one-up you. There's social battles that go on all the time, and you might not be adept at handling it, a common problem. And there's secrets. People are hiding things. You have authority figures who the native culture respects. All of these things are archetypally different because you deal with them psychologically at a different place. So when you leave the native culture and you start to experience things that you never have experienced before, like you said, Heath, like if you're in rural Alabama, but then you go to New York, you're still in the native culture. But I would say that you are not. You're in the native culture in the United States, but as a hero or heroine, you're going into a new environment. The rules are different. The people are different. So I think that would still qualify as leaving the native culture, leaving the place that's familiar and going somewhere very different, versus pursuing a familiar environment deeper and deeper and learning more and more about it. So the special world still applies. It's useful as a writer in my opinion, to distinguish an inward journey in the native culture, which is familiarity and possible deceptions and hidden truths, versus leaving the native culture, which may put you out of water, a wilderness survival scenario, possible combat scenario. So it's a little different archetypally, I would say.
We did have a super chat. Let me just go ahead and ask Chris this question right here. Sable Phoenix came in for a super chat for $5. Thank you very much, Sable. Chris, in one interview, you mentioned Campbell was your mentor. Did you actually meet and or collaborate with him personally, or was that figuratively? That's a great question.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a good question, fair question. And I would say the answer is somewhere in the middle here. Mentor is a loose term. Some people define that as having worked with someone on a project. Maybe they give you guidance, something like that. That did not happen directly, but there's no question that I was, as they used to say in mythological terms, under the aegis of Campbell. I really knelt at his feet and tried to get everything I could from him. I met him on maybe 3 occasions, twice at book signings, or when he gave a wonderful presentation, and then I'd come up with a book for him to sign. But I did get his blessing. I wrote to him and I told him that I was undertaking to try to adapt his ideas to the specifics of screenwriting, which he didn't indulge in. And I think he got that message. And when he spoke the last time he was out in public, it was at a screening of a documentary about him, very good documentary. And his wife, so he was being hustled out of the hall, and a lot of people were gathered around him. And his wife saw me and said, "Oh, come on over," and I gestured with my hands. "No, it's okay. I see he's swamped and it's fine." And she said, "No." And she grabbed him by the sleeve and pulled him over to me and whispered in his ear and said, "This man is doing something with the movies." And he pumped my hand and he said, "Young man, you go with this stuff. This will take you a long way." And then he was out of the hall. So accept that as a blessing. And I do think of him definitely as a mentor, because I've tried to step very carefully around his ideas, understand them, challenge them as they needed to be, adapt them to the purpose of screenwriting and other things. But definitely I'm in his shadow. So yeah, mentor for sure.
Well, you're like Prometheus. You took that fire and you gave it to us so that we could learn from it.
Right. That's like bringing the elixir back to the
elixir.
Yeah, and Prometheus got in some trouble for that, and I did too. There was a real pushback. People said, some professional filmmakers said, we know about all this stuff. We've been doing this for years, but don't tell everybody about it. That was the mission of myself and my publisher, the late Michael Wiese, that we felt that this belongs to the world, not just the hero's journey, but filmmaking technology, how to do it, the secrets, the professional secrets of things, all that needed to be opened up. And so that was the spirit in which we put these things forth.
Wow, that's incredible. I just got to ask, have you ever met George Lucas?
No, I look forward to that. The only one of that sort of circle that I ever interacted with was the colleague of Spielberg, Lucas, and Francis Coppola, John Milius, the screenwriter of Conan and director of Conan and The Great Wind and the Man, and the writer of Apocalypse Now. And so on, and actually worked with there as a case where I did work with him on a project that never got made. He was doing, when I worked at Fox, he was doing sort of a Magnificent Seven set in the Middle Ages, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to be a knight who helped the village to fight off some mean guys, and we just had a great time. He said to me, I don't understand why the studios don't put you in charge. You're a great piece of manpower. That's what he said about me. So I didn't understand it either, why they didn't put me in charge.
Neither do we. That's awesome. I was always curious about that because I always viewed it as the big three in terms of the hero's journey, as Campbell was the academic. And by the way, I've read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and to your point, I sometimes wondered how the hero's journey was interpreted. I was like, I'd have to read the same paragraph multiple times to really think I understood anything that he just said. I think he used the word esoteric, which is exactly so. But you had Campbell, who was an academic, teaching in academia for academics, writing for academics, and then Lucas, who entered academia, who then took this and applied it to Star Wars. And then in interviews when he was like, yeah, use the hero's journey, people are like, what's that? When they read The Hero with 1,000 Faces, they still didn't know what it was. So I feel like you were the third column there to be like, this is what the hero's journey is. But I think you did even more than that. I think you taught by understanding the hero's journey, and then you also applied it to how the same archetypal events occurred in your life.
Yes. Bridge
that gap between story and personal experience, human experiences. And I think you taught a lot of people about story structure. And I think that that's an incredible achievement personally.
Yeah, it certainly was something that was present immediately. The idea that, okay, this is a wonderful set of technology tools for making commercial films that will play around the world. And it has proven out to be that. But at the same time, it was clear that this is much more than that, as Campbell's work was, a guideline for living and for achieving levels of higher consciousness. That was his basic, crystallized core belief, is that this is all the stories are encoded instructions in how to become more human, more fulfilled, more conscious. And that might involve, great interchanges where you are transformed, or you blow your mind somehow and have a connection with the universe, or it might be some little realization of, I've been too hard on myself, or I misjudged her and I should, clean up my act. So people immediately started coming to me saying, it's fine for the screenwriting thing. That's great. But, in my life, it really helped me overcome trauma of the going to Vietnam or whatever it was, it got me through my first year of law school, or it got me through my divorce, or it got me through something that was hard, and it just really served. And I'm so glad about that it turned out to be useful, as Campbell was. Campbell's deal was that the hero's journey is in every one of his works, but it's always buried. It's in the middle of a 400-page book. It'll be on page 232, or it's at the end. It's the outline is almost always in there someplace, verbally, or he'll give a diagram.
Wow!
But he sort of embedded it and buried it under all the examples and also his poetic way of expressing himself.
Well, and that's why the hero's journey isn't going anywhere, nor should it. It is almost like an echo of human action over millions of years, probably. And I'll keep this brief. I had a tough time in my life, and it was interesting because I was reading about the hero's journey, and I'm talking the lowest I've ever been, and I started reading about the belly of the beast and how the hero is sometimes dismembered or destroyed, and then how the hero comes back. And I just kept staring at that. I'm like, the hero comes back. And that was all I needed to feel like I was ready to go re-engage. So it has real life profound impacts because it does echo the human experience.
This just reminds me of something in defense of Campbell, who was criticized for being male, for being 19th century, for being chauvinistic, and all these things, and some of them are in a sense true. He was conscious always of the goddesses and of particular stories in the most ancient of the stories that we have, like the story of the goddess Inanna. And one of the things, I just want to toss this to you, Douglas, was that part of one of those stories is that she is ritually stripped. The demons come and tear away her clothes layer by layer by layer and put her back together again then. And it seems like a wonderful metaphor to me of how someone does need to divest themselves of their self-assumptions and then kind of rebuild or reclothe themselves. So what do you say to that? Interesting.
My first thought was, you said it was demons. Do they do it with malicious intent?
Yeah, I think they're tormenting her. I don't remember the details that well, but this is the takeaway impression was that it was part of an ordeal that she had to pass through in her special world, in the ordeal in the cave deep in the labyrinth, or on her way to her goal.
Well, there's two things that come to mind. One is the end result of the heroine's arc, and that is the rearrangement, which is the Act 3, what I've labeled as Act 3, which is that the labyrinth is rearranged in a certain way, right, where society is changed. So there is a renewal factor in the rearrangement. And it also made me think initially of the poisoned apple, in which the heroine is her abilities, her intellectual powers. It's all if she's a warrior, her ability, it's all bypassed in this way. And the poison apple usually follows the images of an unconscious heroine, restrained with a menacing figure, usually the masked minotaur, hovering over her. And the idea is that you are bypassing the heroine's, consent. This is against her will. You're bypassing that, and it's symbolically destructive of the willpower. But the heroine survives this, and is not converted or captured in the end. So the poisoned apple is a weapon, I view it as, delivered to the heroine in bad faith, but the heroine survives this and then re-engages in Act 3. So there are some parallels there. That's very interesting. And I like it because I love stories of renewal. I think they're vital. They're important to people. They need to know they can come back. They need to know that they're still in the fight,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big point here. Overall, this is that the stories, not unlike fairy tales, give us some reassurance that somebody else has been through something difficult, just as you are going through now. And sometimes they're destroyed by it tragically. Look out for that. Don't make the mistakes they make. But some of them get through and are transformed and reach this higher consciousness, or are able to rebuild their world and themselves. So I think that's a high value in these things, especially today, when the stories are made for times like this. There have always been times like this, but we're in a little bit of an extreme condition here, and so we need these things all the more.
Well, and I totally agree. In fact, I would even say that one of the lessons of the Heroine's Labyrinth is, you asked about the demons that tore her. The demons aren't changeable. They sound like the unchangeable factor there that the heroine will be dealing with. And in a lot of stories, the masked minotaur archetype is the unchangeable being. And I found this to be completely fascinating, that the beast as ally archetype in stories is almost a mirror image of the minotaur. They're both kind of bestial characters, half man, half human. And the minotaur has the animal side that wins out, the animal tyrant, whereas the beast as ally, his humanity is what wins out in the end. But the reason I think this is important is because it teaches the heroine, or any of us, that there are the unchangeable beings, the people you cannot reason with, the ones that will always be there, versus the one that you can have a relationship with, professionally or whatever, somebody who is working with you, who recognizes your humanity. So I think that that's an important distinction for a heroine to learn that lesson, and for us to learn that lesson, that there are these two types of people. Not everyone is going to be reformed, or not everyone is going to be saved. And it's not your job to save everybody, in life.
Yeah, I think that is a sort of built-in assumption that we carry a lot of times. The idea that, if I just talk the right way, or if I exhibit the right behavior, or hit the right buttons, I can get the behavior out of an opponent or an antagonist the way I want. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't, and you are only hurting yourself if you try to go up against them directly.
And it's important to recognize the difference. I think that was the key. That the heroine learns to recognize the difference, and that's vital. That's a vital human lesson.
Let me. I've got a question here. I know we're running short on time, but I've got a question here for Christopher that also deals with one of the Heroine's Labyrinth archetypes right here that you may have even created. I was listening to one of your YouTube videos, and you were talking about consulting on the movie Aladdin, and how you had brought forward the idea of having the monkey as the companion of Aladdin, and then also the flying carpet, right? The flying carpet, and also the parrot that's the companion of Jafar. And to me, I didn't get to go back and do a whole plot out of the outline or like the timeline of animal companions in Disney, but I was fascinated by that because I was like, wow, when I think of Disney films, like one of the first things I always think about is some kind of animal companion like that the main character has. Maybe Aladdin was one of the major first, incarnations of that. It surprised me that Disney didn't immediately think, like at the time, I would have thought Disney, animal companion. But it surprised me that at that time they were making Aladdin, they didn't immediately think, we've got to have some kind of cute animal companion for that, which I think often fulfills the role of Doug's fragile power in the Heroine's Labyrinth. So do you want to talk about the development of those kinds of characters, Chris? I thought that was fascinating.
Yes, I would say, first of all, that I don't claim to be the only originator of those elements, or in any case, I worked on The Lion King and I contributed, I think, some important visuals and moments in a string of films around that time. But the truth is that somewhere between 300 and 600 people made those movies. And out of that group, there's a boiling soup of ideas all the time. And probably if I said something or wrote it into a memo, there were probably 3 or 4 other people who had the same idea. And the reason that it got in and landed and stuck in the script, like the flying carpet and the monkey, was maybe because 3 or 4 people are saying this is a good idea, and drawing pictures of it and, advancing it. But I was thinking, almost every input I made into those pictures was referenced by something. It resonated off of something. In Lion King, there were things from my Catholic background and the way the church was laid out, and the stained glass window and the blessing of the baby with in the baptism, holy oil and things like that. All that got into the structure of Lion King, and with the animal companions and these animated things like a carpet that it becomes a living thing, I was referencing there the classical gods and goddesses of Greece, who often have an animal companion, and the animal is there to amplify the qualities of that character. For example, Athena she has a bunch of symbols. She has a spear and a helmet and a shield, the aegis, and the breastplate. But she is often accompanied by an owl. And there are many different qualities assigned to Athena, but wisdom is one of the primary ones. And so owls are associated with wisdom, and thus the association in art, it would first of all help you identify a statue as, oh, that's Athena because there's an owl on her shoulder. Many of the gods and goddesses look similar. So these attributes, they're called, help to specify that character. And then there would be stories woven about those. And a lot of that is lost, unfortunately, but we can use our active imagination to get some of it back. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how people retell the myths and use the poetic imagination just like they did in the old days. And let's find out the story about that owl. How did Athena come to get it, and what does it mean to her? So that's where I was coming from with those elements. And in the development of those stories for Disney, they would start with the basic fairy tale, which is usually very short, maybe 2 or 3 pages long. It doesn't have a lot of character in it. It doesn't have a lot of scenes or development. It's very kind of primal and chunky. So they had to start pulling things apart and adding dimensions and so forth. And this was part of that process of almost once it was basically formed, then how can we add a layer to give comedy and reactions, those animal helpers and the magical things like Dr. Strange's cape is like that. It's animated and it has a mind of its own and its own agenda. But for sure, those things give another dimension and give the hero something to interact with and comment, just like a normal human sidekick does. They observe, they comment, they ridicule, they encourage, they warn, and same thing with those animals. So it helps amplify the character.
That's awesome. And I love those characters in Aladdin, by the way.
Yeah, that landed very well. went through some development of that and trying different things, but how it ended up was really nice.
Yeah, Heath and I had done a. Oh, go ahead, Heath.
Oh, no, I was saying Robert for 499 had said thank you to Chris. Thank you. Sometimes secrets disappear with regard to the material that Campbell had talked about. Sometimes secrets disappear to the ages. Sometimes I worry about situations where knowledge can be lost for millennium. We need this. So thank you.
Yeah. The body of knowledge is fragile. And we've seen, I've been looking back at myths and sometimes all we have of one of these important gods is the broken feet of the statue. And they hardly even know if it was male or female. Like there was a god Agon, who's the god of the contest. And his name is embedded in antagonist and protagonist and agony and other things. For a long time, all they had was the feet. And now they've found statues and have explored that a little more. But oh my, it's tragic, really, how much has been lost. But you still have your poetic imagination, just as they did in the old days.
Yeah,
that's. I think this is what you're doing, Douglas. Is you're using the poetic imagination, which is to pose these questions: what's in there? Why is it there? And in your writing too. To write about a historical character as you did. You have to go to the room and you have to think about everything that's, what's on the wall and what's on the floor and what's going on outside the window. And
100%.
Oh man, that is a huge act of your mind to think all this stuff up. So
yeah, you do have to delve in there and be in that headspace for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I think these archetypal designs are so useful for. To me, it's so good to internalize these things like the hero's journey or, the heroine's labyrinth or so that when you are writing, the structure slides to the background. You've internalized it, and then you could be intuitive with your storytelling, knowing that you're at least on the right path or doing something that should resonate in the story.
Yeah, I find this myself in my humble efforts to create scenes and so forth is that you sort of look at the map before you start, then you put the map aside and you don't drive with the map stuck to the windshield. You put it aside and then you get lost and you pull it out. Or what's really cool is you just let that poetic imagination unspool and, you just sort of say, okay, I'm in the screening room, roll them and, let's see what comes up. And then there's a delight in finding, oh, you know what? That actually landed right on stage 7 of the hero's journey and is exactly perfect to do what, if I'd been looking for it, I would have been happy to find it. But I wasn't looking for it, but there it was anyway.
Totally.
And that's just delightful. And it validates for me that this stuff is hardwired into us. And you don't have to work so hard. You just, you let your mind naturally think about things and what happened and why, and you're going to find these bones emerging.
I agree. In fact, I tell people all the time, you're probably writing these archetypes accidentally. If you can find them, zoom in and build them out, because those are the big ones, that you accidentally reproduce. So
yeah, just even in a small way. I worked with a writer one time, and he had a story about a sad guy who had been in school, and the little girl said, "I'm having a birthday party. I want everybody to come except him," and pointed to this poor guy. And so he went away, and he had his life, and he came back to the town. The girl's name was Mary. He came back to the town, and he went to rent a car. And the woman at the desk was Mary, and she wouldn't rent him a car. She just refused him to rent the car. So again, he was pushed back by Mary. And I said, "That was brilliant, man! How you made Mary this now grown-up obstacle that carried through the idea." And he said, "Oh my God, I never even thought about that. I didn't think they were the same person. I just reached for a name, and that was the one that came up." So he's lazy in his thinking. But he had accidentally done something intelligent and story wise.
It accidentally does something intelligent.
Yeah, that's what instincts are, accidental intelligence.
I'm hoping I get that writer's critique one day when I take a script to somebody or something like, accidentally, Heath, you've done something intelligent.
You didn't mean to, but don't change it back. You stumbled into something great. So,
some of the members in the chat asked me, Doug, did you do this intentionally in the book? And I started to say no, and they're like, no, don't say no. Always say you did it intentionally.
Yeah, that's right. You certainly would take that.
It was deliberate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's true. That part of you was intentional about it and conscious.
Unconsciously.
Sable Phoenix for $10 said, just with regard to Campbell as well, just because something is old and doesn't fit the changes to cultural mores doesn't mean that passing on that ancestral wisdom is morally turpid. Those who jump on Campbell are ideologically myopic.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I just pulled it up. There's a quote he says. I put it in the Heroine's Labyrinth because I believe in this so much. Joseph Campbell said, quote, "For the symbols of mythology are not manufactured. They cannot be ordered, invented, or permanently suppressed. They are the spontaneous productions of the psyche, and each bears within it, undamaged, the germ power of the source." Right. I love that because you can't make them up. You can't say, this is what I want heroines to do. This is what I want heroes to be good. You can't manufacture that. They have to come inherently. They come from the human psyche. Your job is to identify them, and hopefully, if you're a writer, to use them properly to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I am the master of the obvious, and that I am telling you things you already know, but reminding you. And as Campbell did, I try to articulate them and give them names and sort of corral them a little bit and try to think of all the variations, as Campbell did. He tried to be exhaustive about all the different things that might happen. And I tried to do the same, but always aware that I was just tapping my own veins, and that everybody's got this on some level. And then there's a lot of arguments about, well, it's culturally, it's a Western idea. People have said, it's a 19th century invention of the Industrial Revolution to enslave people and so forth. You get all this anti-rhetoric, but I think it crosses cultures, and people watch movies across the world and get them because we all have arms, legs, eyes, hands, and the biology is the same, and the life cycle is the same, and so it makes sense.
Totally agree. And Lucas himself, he was watching movies that were made in Japan that helped, so it wasn't like he was taking an Eastern idea that he identified with. And when we put it into Star Wars, we identified with it, so I do think there's something transcendent about these things. And I trust that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Heath, you've been walking us through, where are you on the plan here?
Well, we always over prepare here, so they're about they're about 40 more topics on this list. I was going to ask you, can I give you one more question? I know you have to go after about an hour. Can I give you one more question?
I'm good for a while. So
okay, all right. Let's go to this one then. Because you studied so many different kinds of stories in order to put together the writer's journey and frame the hero's labyrinth. What were the stories that really gave you pause, or that were the most difficult for you to kind of understand in its context, or that you really struggled with?
I'm going to hand that one to Douglas.
Well, there was tons. In fact, so my love of stories goes all the way back to the 80s. I'd put in VHS tapes, and I'd sit on the couch with the pad of paper, and I would handwrite notes. What is working, what's not. And one of my favorite all-time movies is Amadeus. And I tried to graft, that's a bad word for it, but I tried to apply the hero's journey to Amadeus, one of my all-time favorite films, and I could not do it. I had all sorts of bizarre efforts I was like, whoever's doing this is doing, maybe they're opposite heroes' journeys and they're crisscrossing. And, so I was trying all sorts of ways to figure it out. I couldn't. I struggled to, The Dark Knight was a tough one with Heath Ledger. That seemed to have scenarios that just keep crescendoing between the hero and the villain. So there were some that really threw me. And of course, when I started studying hero-centric stories, like Jane Eyre, I was really struggling to find the hero's journey beats. Pride and Prejudice was another one. Although I just found, I set it aside. I want to read it. Someone did try to break down Pride and Prejudice as a hero's journey. So I'm curious to read their interpretation of that. So there are definitely, like, you don't hear those stories thrown around as great examples of hero's journeys, for examples. But they work. They work. Amadeus was a Best Picture winner. So there's some incredible stuff going on there. And by the way, I am able now to interpret Amadeus. I'm so happy with this. As a Heroine's Labyrinth story as told by the masked Minotaur. Salieri is a masked Minotaur. He's trying to possess the heroine, in this case, Mozart. So anyway, I was so happy when I was finally able to make sense of it structurally.
Well, let me I'll bring up this as well and see what Chris has to think about this, because we had talked to Maxwell Alexander Drake about this topic of the monomyth, Campbell's monomyth. And I asked him, like, can all the stories fit within the monomyth? And he said at the time, maybe. He said, maybe you could generalize all stories to some, sufficient level of abstractness that you end up with some type of form where all stories fall into. And maybe that's possible. So maybe it's true. But he said that he felt that by the time you did that, perhaps all of your explanatory power would be lost. Because, something that explains everything explains nothing. So if you actually did come up with, here is the theory that explains all story right here, maybe you don't have much explanatory power left. And so that's why I'm working under the assumption that maybe there are 6 to 8. I don't know. I'm pulling those numbers kind of out, like major story structures that we talk about, because that seems like, just because it seems like it's not one, so we're not overgeneralizing, but I'm also not telling you, hey, there might be 35, or 45 you got to deal with. What do you think about that idea, Chris?
Well, I go back to something you said, Heath, about interpretation, that you can interpret almost any narrative. You can cram it or fit it into a hero's journey form. You could also interpret as a Marxist interpretation that it's all economics, it's all power struggles, and have a perfectly valid theory of screenwriting that was based entirely on that and nothing to do with the hero's journey. You could interpret stories with your primary metaphor. Instead of the journey, it could be a baseball game. Every story is really a baseball game, and I could make that case. So, I think you're right that you run into some logical exhaustion or some walls when you try to do this. But I'll just give you one example from my own. When I encountered Campbell and Star Wars, I thought, goody, here we go, something for commercial work henceforth. But what about me? What about the artist? What about the burning passions within me and the desire to, shatter all these illusions of order and, be a pure intuitive artist? So I made as my thesis film a samurai movie, and that's all I had to hang on with. There'll be samurais, there'll be swords, there'll be costumes, and some kind of attempt at Asian sounding music. But the rest of it is going to be anti-hero's journey. No structure, no motivation, no clear resolution, no backstory, nothing that you would associate with a hero's journey. And I'm so proud of myself, made this, chaotic mess of a film. And I showed it to my fellow film students, and I was just stunned because they went, wow, it's amazing how with these crazy images you were able to create a coherent hero's journey that had motivation, backstory, and we knew when he turned his head to look, he was looking at his dead wife and son who were killed by the villain, and they put all this stuff back into it. So I think we're up against something that people are first they are hardwired to it, to respond just like we did at the campfires, to enactments of these scenes, but then also we're acculturated to it because we've all consumed thousands and thousands of stories that reinforce this, that there must be some reason for this, there must be some resolution, there must be some takeaway theme. So it's very difficult to escape that form unless you just want to make pure abstract chaos.
Well, I actually have a question.
Even then they're gonna try to impose that on a Rothko painting or the most abstract thing. They're gonna go, it looks like a tree to me.
Well, what's interesting, so that leads me to a question that we talk about here on the channel. One of the things that we've decided is a subversion of a theme sometimes is still hitting the theme. So sometimes by trying to avoid it or by trying to skip it, you are still including it. It's still casting a shadow into your story. So, and that when you just said that I did everything to avoid every possible thing, and the audience was like, oh, we saw it all. It was still there. And you're like, that's impossible. So I wonder what you thought about that. Do you agree that the subversion of a theme still incorporates the theme in some way?
Well, I walked away from that experience appreciating the artists who are trying to do this, who are trying to escape. They're trying to shatter the forms that everyone expects. And I salute them and I give them a lot of credit, but they're kind of in a box because, as you say, all you can do is say, I'm not that, but then that is still there.
Yes.
So, so you're then playing with a deck of cards that says, there's no hero, there's no journey, there's no mentor, there's no special world, there's no motivation, and yet all those things are kind of measured by your mind as that's usually there, but it's not here. So, you haven't escaped. You really, you'd have to be really, really clever or bold in order to blast this thing to smithereens. And I'd love to see it.
Yeah,
I'd love to see it.
Me too.
Popular commercial work that turned all this on its head without reference to it, and that's the hard part.
That's the key. That's the hard part, right?
Yeah. I agree.
All right, let me ask you this. This is a direction that we've been thinking about taking the channel as far as discussion. We just haven't gotten to it yet because we've been so stuck on the original structure. But I'll let you take this one, Chris, because we talk about, obviously, Star Wars. The original Star Wars movie is used all the time as an example of the hero's journey and for story structure. I mean, basically all the books I've got over here, I mean, including yours, but the Secrets of Story, the dynamic story creation, they all reference the original Star Wars. And yet, so many people, when they talk about Star Wars, go, The Empire Strikes Back was the best one. They love The Empire Strikes Back. All of our books talk about Star Wars. Everybody's like, but Empire was the best one. What can we learn about story structure and telling stories from Empire Strikes Back? Maybe even talking about writing a fantastic sequel or whatever this is that is not talked about in all of our story writing books that perhaps should be.
Well, I'd have to go back and take a look at Empire to see, what the fine tuning was there. But my first thought is that in the original Star Wars film, you were kind of given the alphabet or the color wheel or whatever, this is sort of relating to something you said, Douglas, about probabilities, likelihood, that the things fell into their places in kind of a statistical likelihood way, that if you look at 1,000 stories, 900 of them would have the hero starting as Luke Skywalker does. and that something happens to him and there's a call to adventure and so forth. It was sort of an average of a lot of stories. And then that gave you the baseline. So now we can start to build on that and challenge and find out that Luke, loses things, loses parts of his body, gains things, gains more power over the Force, finds out a little bit more about his relationships with the other characters, goes into his own kind of labyrinth. So I think, generally that's how the thing worked out. And then there's this weird phenomenon throughout all movies that, Terminator 2 is the best of them. And there's
Aliens.
Yeah, there's a tendency for some reason for them to get the sweet spot on the second of maybe 3 or more films.
The Wrath of Khan.
Because you didn't have enough money and resources on the first one, but you did the best you could, and it was wonderful. You had enough on the second one to make it really sing. And then on the third one, it gets complicated. People get tired. You got too much money, too much pressure.
Too much money, yeah.
And you've done the basic operation, and now you have to do it again a little different. And that's where the Marvel universe is now, that everybody knows how those things operate, and all you can do is be subversive and irreverent, or very dark. So those are the kind of binds that you get yourself into when you start iterating and doing going back to the well. You're going to run into some of those problems.
Yeah. Marvel has certainly run into some walls after. And by the way, that's not to take anything away from the incredible success they had. I would say from Iron Man through Endgame, that was a heck of a ride.
Yeah. Yeah, but also I think. Just to talk about Marvel, that you can track it back to the comics, because the comics reached that point very early where we kind of know, how Tony Stark operates and how the others operate. But then there's this supervillain that comes, and there's this weird, this suspension of time, and there's this other, limitation. He loses his battery, or these wrinkles come up. But the comics have their own pleasure. Just like, okay, I had steak and eggs once. Am I going to never have steak and eggs again? No, I like steak and eggs. So, next time I'll have it with a little different preparation. And so, I think the comics are consumable. The Marvel comics, Marvel Universe movies are consumables. And in some ways, it doesn't matter so much that they're not completely reinventing the universe or shocking us, because we want like a steady diet and enjoy something that's the same but a little different. And there's a reassurance, just like with fairy tales. I don't mind hearing the fairy tale again, because every time I think a little differently in my mental laboratory about that.
Yeah, some stories are great too. The more you watch them, the more you pick something else up that you didn't catch the first time.
Oh, yeah.
I love those. Those are the ones that are good because you can keep unpacking them,
Yeah, I'm running into a phenomenon now where watching with other people on streaming shows, I stay awake and the other people fall asleep. So what that means is that I have to keep running it back again to catch them up when they do wake up. My wife and my sister-in-law and so forth, when they do wake up, I have to roll it back. And it's such a reward to me, because I start seeing all these things I missed if I only watched it once through, I wouldn't have understood. I wouldn't have seen. I wouldn't have noticed.
See, Chris, they're helping you by falling asleep.
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, I'm watching this True Detective with Jodie Foster right now. And the little Easter egg was that as she's in a laboratory where some people have been taken away by some unknown monster, the camera just moves quickly by a bookshelf, and on the bookshelf is a video of John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yes. Yeah, I caught that. I love that.
So, if you're in the know, you know they're thinking, and they gave you that little treat.
100%. My wife and I are also watching that, so we've been enjoying it. And we also noticed, and Heath, I don't know if you've seen it yet, the spiral is in there, which is
it is
a great symbol for the labyrinth. So,
Yes.
James for $10 says, Journey and now the Labyrinth are codified observations on how similar humans are across all cultures. We tell stories with similar elements to teach the new generations. True memes, as Dawkins said.
True memes.
And Alan says, this is the essence of conversation and dialogue. So thank you, Alan. That's what we try to do here. Deep conversations in the geekverse. That's what we try to do.
Yeah, I'll just say about myths in general. There are two kind of ways of interpreting that word, and one of them is it's phony, it's a lie, it's fanciful, it's fantasy, it couldn't happen, it's impossible. That's kind of the definition of something mythic. Is there's a monster or a creature or a condition that does not exist in our real world, so it's not true, it's a lie. And we use it in common speech. We say, if my political opponent says he can balance taxes and balance the budget and cut taxes and do defense and do all these things, he's telling you a myth. So it's not true.
Yeah, Mythbusters.
Right. Yeah, that's a lie or that's an exaggeration. But this was Campbell's idea. The myths are a different kind of truth. They're a deep psychological truth. They're an eternal truth. They get at a truth about human life in an indirect story way that's more powerful because it's subtle and it's given in the form of a metaphor or a fanciful tale, but it's revealing something, and something that's very useful and needed, and all the more real. So I say myths are maybe a lie to you, but to me they're hyper true. They go to some higher level of reality.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like the expression may be fantastical, but the what's under the hood is exactly real. We're responding to these things for a reason. Like when you see, I always think of the snake. Because you're outside and you jump when you see it. You don't calculate that, and when you see imagery like that on screen, you are conditioned to avoid that. There's no intellectualizing there. You get the accidental intelligence of jumping out of the way, So, but I agree. I think those are in some ways as real as they get.
I've got a question here, James says Doug can trace a direct line back to Campbell now, because he's been on a live stream with Chris Vogler, who had been touched by.
Well, I would have a lot of work to do to earn something like that.
You got the laying on of hands. We've got.
Yeah, I actively do that with people when I give my presentations. I try to transmit something. I try to pass on something, and especially I'm looking for people like Douglas who have put in the work. You went through a process by applying it to something and then seeing, and that's where the value comes. Apply it to anything, but you applied it to your novel and then found, well, that's a little weak and that's not completely thought out, and there's other ways. And so you are growing the thing and keeping it organic, keeping it alive. And I certainly share with you the blessing that I got. So,
well, thank you. That is awesome.
And that's your objective, is to pass it on. That's the other part of the contract here, is that you have to look for others in the chain who are going to go and continue the work and give them your blessing.
Absolutely. The sacred fire.
That's right.
We can end on one last question here. I think if everybody's go on with this, that might help, I'm sure is a common criticism but talking about of these kinds of story theories, that what is the difference between a story structure and a formula? Because people seem to be resistant to, we're going to be formulaic. Now, I have an idea like that you can have stories, and to me, when you read the writer's journey or the heroine's labyrinth or all of this, that this we're not a formula, but there are stories, it appears, that are formulaic and are incredibly successful. When I think of a formulaic story, I think of like Home Improvement, that the sitcom from years ago. Like, if you're going to tell a Home Improvement story, we got to start with him on his show. He's got to go talk to his neighbor, which I just escaped my name. But there's a formula to that story. Or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Like, you watch like 100 episodes of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you watch the same episode over and over again because it is formula. They fight somebody out of uniform, then they turn into their uniform and whatever. So, but obviously that's very successful in some cases. A formula for a TV show, they hit it and then you make tons of money. But what is the difference? Like, if somebody's saying, no, I can't follow this structure because I want to be formulaic, what's the difference between those two and what's the meaning here? You want to go first, Chris?
You want to take that, Doug?
Well, I think you had mentioned it earlier when talking about comic books. Sometimes a formula is a standard mode of operation. The reader or the viewer knows what to expect. I think of actually McDonald's. They say, who can make a better burger than McDonald's? And everyone raises their hand. It's like, well, they're not selling you a better burger. They're selling you something that you can count on, a reliable experience in terms of the taste, food. It's all standardized. It's familiar and it's easy to repeat it. So I think, to me, a formula is something like that. It's not trying to be avant-garde. It's not trying to create art at a certain level, perhaps by subverting everything or trying to do something completely new. They're trying to give you something that you know what you're expecting and you know what you're going to get. And their job is to entertain you for that period of time. But something like Campbell, you're trying to tell a story at a deeper level. So I think, the idea of an archetype is it manifests itself. It expresses itself different in each story. The dragon that is slayed can be, a dragon that's breathing fire in one movie, and then in the next movie, it's a giant Death Star shooting a green laser. Then in the next one, it's a radioactive, iguana shooting radiation out of its mouth. So they're expressed totally differently, but underneath they're the same. And I think a TV show or possibly a comic book run, I don't know if they're trying to do that. I think they're trying to entertain you for a short period of time with something that you've come to expect. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we can make some distinctions about words that we use to describe the patterns. And some of them have a negative feeling about them, like formula does. When you say something's formulaic, you mean I'm not going to be surprised by anything here. I've seen it before multiple times, and they are simply just turning the crank and doing the same thing again, maybe a little bit bigger this time or in a different location with maybe different actors, but it's exactly the same routine. A maybe better word for what we're talking about is a paradigm, and that was used in the early days. Sid Fields, the great pioneer of story structure, you called it a paradigm, and that's a little bit looser than formula. A word I find useful these days is algorithm. Yes. Although we're not using mathematics, we are confronting situations and studying for ourselves the different ways there are to handle those situations. Somebody gets in a jam, how do they get out of it? That's where the repetition comes, because people get in jams over and over, but also where the difference comes because we can get out of it many, many ways. And what you want is, and this was true in giving notes to people in the studio system on scripts, we would say, here's a problem. The way you solved it is kind of a cliche. And I want to give you 3 different ways you could solve this. but I don't want you to do any one of those. I trust you as a writer. This is what I would say in my notes. And I learned this from Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the greatest note writer ever. He would say, self-effacingly, I'm not the writer. You're the guys who are getting paid the big bucks, so I trust you. But here are the dumb ways to do it. This is an obvious thing. You could do this. You could do that. Now, you guys go and figure out one I didn't think of. Figure out one you haven't thought of, and that's what keeps the audience surprised and engaged. In my career, I very quickly identified myself as the structure guy because I understood this Campbell thing. But when I worked with the scripts, one by one, Campbell very rarely entered into it formally. It was more a matter of going back to vaudeville, going back to theater, going back to kids playing on a playground and pretending they're something. And what I really, I think, was doing was studying and advising them on narrative strategies. And what structure meant to me was not put it in the box of the hero's journey at the beginning. It's called Adventure Must Be between pages 10 and 15 and so forth. It wasn't like that. It was more like in this particular story, you need flashbacks. This is a memory piece. So the structure is going to be a series of events in the present that trigger thinking about the past. And so that becomes your structure, so to speak, your narrative strategy for that particular film. And so it would determine things, a sense of this that I developed would determine things like, do we repeat sequences? Do we go a long time without visiting a character to the point where we almost forget about them? Do we manipulate the cards as we're making our outline for this thing in such a way to keep the urgency going all the time? These are the structural things that on the ground, not in the abstract for the book, but script by script. It was more about that, about what's the best way to tell this story? What's the best way to give this play to the audience? And that's going to be different for everyone. And it's an intuitive thing. You can't really use formulas or even algorithms. This is more about, hey, what's best for this movie?
See, I love that because you just said it too, intuitive. You're leaving room for that creative intuition, which is so vital to stories. I mean, we've all been there as writers where you write something for structure and it sounds like you wrote it structurally. It's like lifeless. It's just the structure. So you have to have that creative intuition. So I love that you just said that.
I just am flashing on a moment in film school when I realized I had this intuitive snapshot ability to take any story and tune it just a little bit so that connections were made better, the audience understood, had better orientation, or something was intensified. And the example was we were in the first week of school and we all had to come up with a pitch. And one guy said, I want to do something with an old man who's at the end of his creative life and he's given up. And then he realizes he has a grandson he didn't know about. And they come and live together and they clash. Okay. So I'm sitting there in the quadrangle, listening to this. And I jumped up and I said, hey, what if the old man and the boy meet each other before they know they're related and they clash? And the little boy runs over his foot with a skateboard or something, and the old man yells at him and chases him off the lawn. And then they find out they're already at odds. But then they find out that's your grandson that you just yelled at. and it's immediately everybody, especially the writer, went, wow, yeah, oh yeah, that would be good. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. They're little refinements. And usually, like with my friend who wrote Mary and Mary on the same character, it's latent in the story already. And all I was ever doing as a advisor, as a consultant, was just going, you already said that, man. It's on page 52. Just heap it up a little more. Just shine a little more light on it. And that will pay off better. So that was an awful lot of my structural contribution at the studios, was this kind of tuning for maximum effect.
That's awesome.
Are you familiar with John Truby? Sable for $5 had asked, would you say that's along the same lines as Truby's idea of transcending genre by combining two or more genres within the same genre? Because he's big on this idea of transcending a genre in story.
Yeah, John Truby is a frightening genius. He scares me by how thoroughly he slices and dices the genres and analyzes them, much as you have, Doug. You've done a similar job of work. But he hit on something there, which is very real. And we saw this in operation at Disney under Jeffrey Katzenberg, because Katzenberg would say to us in animation, we're going to try to do something with Rumpelstiltskin, but that little fairy tale is not enough. So why don't we combine Rumpelstiltskin with some classic movie like Casablanca, or It Happened One Night, or Ordinary People? He would slap two things together, and from that would come a much more sophisticated, multi-level idea. So I think that's what John Truby may be speaking of, is that you get to take all the things off the rack that people recognize of that genre, and then bring in a whole raft of other stuff, and then see how they play together. It's a beautiful thing. When I was composing film examples, I just took 2 VCRs back in the day and record off of one. And I took like 25 different movies and showed, here's 5 calls to adventure, here's 5 refusals, here's 5 from all different genres. And the bizarre thing was, the movies started talking to each other, and they made a coherent story out of these fragments.
Oh,
it was an inner skeleton that was universal, and all you had to do was drop something in, and it would just automatically answer the question of the last scene in a completely different genre or a completely different time, in black and white. Cary Grant would be asking something in Gunga Din, and then 25 years later he's in North by Northwest answering his own question.
Oh, man.
It's just this weird, eerie thing. I call it the needle drop, because in editing sound and trying to make something match up to a piece of music, you might look at the finished product and say, wow, how did they adjust everything and cut just exactly at the right point to get the climax? Usually they don't. They just drop the needle on a record. And if you start where the scene starts, it'll reach the climax just by this weird kind of interconnected web-like way that stories have. The scene will come to the climax just when the music does. And I, as you said, Douglas, I trust it. I trust that if you trust, these things will just spontaneously happen, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, what's funny is, toward the later stage of studying the Heroine's Labyrinth, I started to get to the point where I would know where to look, and then there it was.
Yes. There's a hole there, so let's find the hole and find what goes in that hole, and trust that there is something there. It'd be surprised and delighted that it's better. The accidental insight that we've been talking about is usually better than the one you plan and totally consciously dream up. So
Let me ask you about that question, that word you just used, though, because I asked Doug about this word too. You said accidental.
mhm.
So if you're writing along things, do you accidentally come up with these archetypes and this structure, or do you organically come up with it, or innately come up with it? Because one of the hypotheses that we've been working with kind of on this channel as we've been studying this is that these things are innate and psychological, and they're not just something that's learned over repetition, that there's something deeper than that. As a hypothesis, we could be incorrect, but that's the hypothesis that we're working on. So is it accidental when you write these things, or is it innate or organic, or is there a different word that we should be using?
No, I like accidental.
You like accidental?
I think that's real, and that again, you learn to trust that and sort of count on it, and go. If we just go along, and maybe we'll have a hole, and we don't know. Sometimes the sort of idiotic character, the fool, will be looking out the window and say something, and the hero goes, "That's it. That's it. You didn't know what you were saying, but that's exactly it." So this kind of thing happens. That the thing comes up on TV. You're trying to figure it out over here on paper, and then you watch a news report, and there it is. The very thing you were looking for, better than you could ever have dreamed, is there. But this does involve a certain amount of trust in that accidental process.
That's awesome. Yeah, music sometimes helps, trigger that spontaneity. Like you listen to soundtrack music, and suddenly the music is going in one direction, and suddenly your mind just pops something out. And it's like that's the scene. That's the scene that I'm gonna write.
You bet. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very big on that, and on a signal system in the body that tells you when you hit something right. This is very important.
Oh,
There is a system within the body that tells you when you are in the presence of an answer to a question or a hole in your story. When something comes up, or someone says something, or a note comes, that's true and beautiful. Your body tells you it's true and beautiful by giving you a little shiver down the arm, a little shiver down the back. I get something like a rain stick, these hollow tubes.
yeah, you turn them.
Beads or beans or something in it, and you turn it, and it sounds like a rain shower. Well, I get something like that down the back of my spine. And it happened in The Lion King. It happened in Aladdin. When I would say stuff, everybody in the room would wiggle, and the animators all took out their pens and they started drawing the scene that I had just mentioned. And you could see it. You could see it in their bodies that they were quivering, because we'd hit on the vein of something true. So you learn to develop that listening to your body. Because it'll tell you. You'll be uncomfortable when you don't have it, and then when you get it, boy, I felt that one.
Oh man, that is great. No one ever talks about that. That a eureka reflex.
It is.
And it's the right answer. You're right. That's amazing. It's almost like you're at a stopping point, and there's someone in the back of your head who's like sifting through something like all day for weeks until they get the right one, and it knows. Man, that's great. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about that.
Well, I went into this in my book to some extent about the fact that in Asia, in philosophies of the East, you have an idea of the chakra system, which is these different centers up and down the spine that have different jobs to do, to open your heart, to give you power, to make you sexy, to help you survive, to give you spiritual enlightenment, and so forth. To open your throat, to express yourself. And when I was critiquing scripts in the studio and reporting in the meeting on what we had read over the weekend, everybody else was being numerical and saying, this will hit this quadrant of the audience, and it'll probably do 50 million in the first weekend. I would just point to these chakra points in my body and say, it got me in the throat, it choked me up, and it twisted my guts. Or I felt my heart pounding and something opened up in my head. and I felt something. So, I look for those physiological reactions.
Well, they're reliable.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to articulate that further in a book or something? Because that's what Sable Phoenix is asking about. Because this does sound absolutely fantastically interesting.
Yeah, sure. It's actually in the latest edition. There is a chapter that deals with the wisdom of the body. That's the title of this kind of umbrella for that idea. But I am working on another book, a new book on the character called Writing with the Gods. And it's not done, but this will deal with the different gods and goddesses and what they had to say about character and how it is expressed in the body. And I think it's a high value thing.
That'll be a great book. I heard you actually mention that, I believe, on
there it is.
Courage.
Yes.
Wisdom of the Body. There we go.
This
is the 25th anniversary edition. So There we go.
Awesome.
Well, my flatmates here are rattling the doorknob saying I have to go and I have to go to the fire and cook a buffalo or something. So
thank you so much for being here. This has been fantastic.
This is pretty cool. Pretty cool, guys. I really enjoyed it, and your questions are great. And Douglas, you're doing fantastic, important, necessary work. And Heath, same thing. Keep going. Just keep at it. This is really something the world needs badly.
Thank you very much. This was awesome. I'll never forget it. This was great.
This is a major landmark episode. I think it'll be referenced on YouTube for a long time to come.
Great.
Thank you so much.
All right. My pleasure. Thank you.
Enjoy that buffalo.
Thanks.
That was awesome.
That was amazing. Yes, that was amazing. Do we need to follow up with anything, or is there anything we need to end with, Doug?
Well, I don't know. I think this was the Chris Vogler episode. I think it stands on its own feet there, and the man is just a fountain of thought and wisdom. So, like, there's a lot to learn, and he had a lot to say. So, I think it's been said for this episode. It was awesome.
I kind of think so too. Thank you. I think so. Yeah. So like I said, I think this will be a landmark episode. It's definitely a landmark episode on this channel. But as far as storytelling goes, I think people will reference this for a long time to come. And we will, I'll clip this. I've been working on clipping stuff. I haven't gotten the clips out, but I have been clipping things and uploading them to YouTube. We got to make thumbnails and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of different episodes that are going to be clipped on this channel, including this one, so that if people are looking for, particular subjects or things like that, there'll be smaller videos. They're like 6 to 8 minutes long. So those will be coming out. So I think a lot of people will discover that this way. And as always, you guys in the comments were fantastic. The chat was a major part of this.
Yeah, this chat's always been a major part of this channel. And what a crew tonight,
So everybody, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for doing this, Doug. And it's so amazing that you got such an incredible endorsement out of him for the Heroine's Labyrinth book, and then he showed up to discuss it too. So that's absolutely
unbelievable.
Thank you for having me host this discussion. Bringing
I was going to say here. It's true. It's true, Heath. You're awesome, and perhaps the most uniquely suited person with your own background in storytelling, your own drive behind all of this. The Heroine's Labyrinth. You're one of the few. The hero's journey. So I thought you did a great job, man.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, James is exactly right. Do you want to wrap up by giving us the Heroine's Labyrinth pre-order details, release dates?
So it's coming. So a couple things. Here's the plan. February 24th, the book will be available for pre-order. She's done a couple other things. We've made the decision to make it a full color book, which excites me. We were so not going to do that, and now we are. So pre-orders will be ready on February 24th. This is for like a paperback kind of book. The actual books will start. The actual launch will be March 26th. That happens to be my dad's birthday. So within a month of each other. So we're about a month away from the pre-orders, a little bit less, and about a month after that for the actual book in hand. So at this moment, we're ordering the ARCs, the ARCs, which means Advanced Reader Copies. And these will be sent out to like Kirkus Reviews and some of the other big name review houses. And they can make or break a book. They could skewer you, or they could say, this is great. And then, of course, you can use that for the rest of the book's life, what Kirkus said. And then after that, the book comes out, and then it is up to the public to decide what they think about it. So those are the deets.
If you look up Heroine's Labyrinth, even on Google, our videos come up.
I love
so that's the best way right now. I don't have at the moment, like sitting here right now, links to throw out. But if you go to this YouTube channel, if you go to Table Talk and look up Heroine's Labyrinth, for sure you will hit all of them. Because those videos, the very first appearance that Doug made on this channel was a discussion of the Heroine's Labyrinth and all of its archetypes and all of its the sequence of events that it goes through. And then we had discussions with Brianna about it, and then James on it. We did specific movies. So if you look up Heroine's Labyrinth on this channel, you'll get to the live streams. And then, like I said, what it'll be then is that when February 24th hits and that goes live, I'm going to start releasing all of our clips about that with pre-order links. So that's what's going to be going on here. Yeah, actually probably should put together a dedicated. That's a fantastic idea. Let me make note of that right now. Make a Heroine's Labyrinth playlist. I will put that on this channel.
Yeah, even when I was re-listening to the Christopher Vogler discussions, and Film Courage does that. They have a Christopher Vogler playlist, and that was perfect.
Yes. So that's what we should have. We will put together a Heroine's Labyrinth playlist. I just want to say also that Christopher Vogler did leave on the most awesome note ever on a Heroine's on a Table Talk conversation. It's like, excuse me, I got people beating down my door saying that I need to go cook a buffalo. Okay. That's fantastic. So
that earns the departure.
Amazing. So that's right. So I wish I were going off here to do something as manly as go kill a buffalo and kill it.
I'll have to remember that one. Doug, why do you got to go? I have to go kill a buffalo. And people are asking me to do this now.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you tomorrow for the morning grind on the Heath's Geekverse YouTube channel. And then on Thursday, by the way, Matt Bird, Secrets of Story, will be here. So it's epic week in Table Talk.
Another one.
That'll be here on this channel. But I'll see you tomorrow for the morning grind on Heath's Geekverse, and then for the Matt Bird discussion on Thursday. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.